to order, and will the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Davis.
Present.
Councilmember Hagenow.
Present.
Councilmember Kerr.
Present.
Councilmember Parmet. Councilmember Sullivan.
Here.
Councilmember Thisted.
Present.
Mayor Riley.
Present.
There are 6 members present.
Great, thank you. At this time, we will have a public comment period for anything that is on the agenda for the work session. Is there anyone from the public who would like to speak? And I'd like to recognize Councilmember Parmet is here.
Hello.
Is there anyone online who would like to speak? Present? In that case, public comment period is closed. And now I'll turn it over to the town manager for discussion of the financials.
And I will turn this over to our financial director, Heidi Fox.
All right, thank you, John. Heidi Wilson, Finance Director, Heidi Fox. Finance Director. All right, so basically this is as of December 31st, 2024, updated, because we're still closing out 2024. John went over most of this at the last meeting, so I'm just going to do a high level, but feel free to ask any questions. And then the January, they will try to get done by the next meeting, March 11th, but most likely it won't be until, what's it, the March 25th meeting. And that's just because Marquetti and Weaver is busy closing out everybody's year end. So if you go over to page 2, where you see our P&L, if you see our total revenue there, we are just under what was budgeted for 2024. We will get a reconciliation March 1st from Summit County for all the taxes to make sure that we received all the funds that we were supposed to. We believe that there's still some funds being owed. So once we get those, then we'll actually be over budget. And then if you go to all the way over to page 4, you will see internal fund.
Excuse me, Heidi,
Yeah.
I'm confused on that last statement because when I look at, never mind. I looked at the wrong budget. All right.
Okay. All right, so go into page 4 where you'll see our expenditures for the general fund. We actually are just a little bit under what was budgeted by $323,000. So that's good news. And then you will see that our operating surplus as of date of this P&L is almost $140,000. But you'll see at the very bottom there at the ending balance in our general fund, we have 1.9 in the bank. Those numbers will change slightly once we have our audit, which is scheduled for May 19th.
When was it again?
May 19th, the week of May 19th. And actually, if you look at our revenues, we'll actually exceed that once they account for our December sales tax revenue. And then if you go over to page 5, you'll see the capital improvement fund, which is at a 0 balance. So in 2024, we were just moving money over from the general fund as needed. Right below that, you'll see the workforce housing fund. So we are still owed February housing from Summit County. So once we get that, and then this doesn't include the November and December revenues from the housing authority either, which total just a little over $222,000. So we'll exceed that budget when everything is finalized. And
Can I ask
then,
a question?
yes.
Is there an issue with the February payment, or are they just
No, and I'm still trying to get my hands on everything to find it out, but the Housing Authority did not give it to us, they gave it to Summit County. So what it should be is in the IGA with Summit County that they need to remit that to us. And then the reconciliation, comes to us on March 1st, so we'll be able to see that.
So they're not, finding it, it's just fake stuff.
Right, great.
And I know John's talked to the town manager, the county manager. I've talked to him, he said, oh yeah, we gotta get to that. And then I think, then we proceed.
Right, yeah, March 1st is their deadline, to give us, everything so we can reconcile everything. And so then I think that's, if they don't show us the money at that time, that's when we start having those hard conversations with
Yeah,
them.
I would suspect they won't.
Yeah.
Because that wasn't specifically part of the IGA, but we'll see.
We'll send Guido after them. So basically,
We're at the end of the table.
I better start working out. So the workforce housing, will be, just a little over, 717,000, once we recognize the November and December payments.
And according to the county's calculation, they owe us $130,000 for February last year.
That is what has been shared with me, by you, so yes.
And it's on the spreadsheet that they sent to us.
Okay, perfect, yeah. So then we'll have over 800,000, which will be good. And then, of course, the conversation, trust fund, is at zero balance, as well.
Sorry, I have one other question.
Yes.
On the housing authority fees, there's a big discrepancy between what we budgeted versus what's actual, I guess. Did we just not understand the fees to start with, or have they gone up?
I'm gonna have to.
Do you want me to address that, John? You weren't here when all that happened.
Yeah, please.
All right, but remember, there was the cost that we picked up when we joined the SCHA for the building, for the new building that they have in Frisco, that had been allocated out to all the communities. And when we joined the SCHA, one of the parts of that agreement was we pick up what our share was for that, and that caused the overrun.
So it's just the fees, it was that capital.
The capital thing that we picked up.
And then, some fun stuff for you guys too. Give me just a second.
In fact, that was $90,000 or $100,000. I can't remember.
Yeah, I do remember now.
Yeah.
Is there a page number that goes with this? No, okay. So right after page 5, I included the graph that has our year-to-date sales tax by month that we have received. So kind of cool to look at. You'll see, February, and then March is way up there, which makes sense because that's spring break. And then of course, April, May, June, a little less. July goes up a little bit. August is pretty steady with that. And then it starts going down from September to October. And then November it increases. And then December it goes back up. So we're excited to get our January for this year to see where that lands. And then after that, we'll have some good year-to-date comparisons with 2024.
Yeah, as I remember, the February number, if we'd had the full month of February, it would have been about 460 last year.
And if you go to the next page, and I know that Ken really liked this graph too. So this is December sales tax numbers, and I broke them down by industry, just to kind of get a sense of where our sales tax revenues come from. You'll see that lodging, of course, is the leading participant at 58% for December. And then right behind that is retail at 16%. And keep in mind, retail is just, in town, and then also e-commerce, and then we have 12% from restaurants.
Councilmember Davis.
Since we do not have our own zip code, are we getting are we getting sales tax from things like Amazon?
So that'll be if it's delivered at somebody's house that's in the Keystone jurisdiction.
So.
But if it's at the post office, where's you guys' post office?
Well, Dylan,
Dylan.
and we're not really sure yet. to tell you
I
the
don't know
truth.
how they could, it's
Yeah.
how would the
Yeah.
post office people? They have the same thing.
Well, it wouldn't be it's the retailer who has to assess it, and they punch an address into,
Yeah, the state of,
Database.
the state
And
of
that
Colorado
address
has
is
it.
different.
most likely.
Well, if it
there's
goes,
stuff
yeah,
like
if it gets shipped to the Dillon post office, then the sales tax dollars go to Dillon, but if it's drop shipped at like your porch, here in Keystone, it'll have Keystone sales tax, or,
We'll
2%
double check on that and make sure.
With the expansion of cluster boxes across the town, will that count as the drop ship to your porch option? Or will that still be routed to the Dillon PO box? The post office?
That would be, once again, it should be
Keystone.
Keystone.
Gotcha.
We'll just make sure that the databases that the retailers use are actually, I'll run a little audit on it, do some test addresses and make sure they're identifying Keystone as a taxing jurisdiction.
yeah, well, because most of like the USPS and stuff like that, UPS, they connect with the state of Colorado's, and so it goes by address, but.
Yeah, but United States Post Office, we are Dillon as far as the United States Post Office is concerned. So does the state's database that retailers are supposed to plug into a state database and see where the taxes are. And I haven't thought to audit that and make sure that our deliveries here are actually happening here.
Blue River has a significant problem with that, for a whole plethora of areas. They've been working it for years.
To any success?
So, is there a hand up over here?
Yeah, I believe
Yeah,
Councilwoman.
Councilmember Thisted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm wondering, perhaps I missed it because it's kind of hard to follow some of the conversation when it's not one at a time, but do we have an update on when we may receive our zip code resolution with the congressional request?
I was gonna talk about this later, but the update is, I think we were trying to get on to the board's meeting with our zip code in the April board meeting of the USPS Board of Governors. But they're having a lot of disruption at the USPS Board of Governors. And it looks like they may be disbanded. And so my suspicion is that there won't be a board meeting. I don't have that confirmed, but that's a likely scenario. The head of the post office, Postmaster General, resigned this past week, and now the board is rumored to be potentially going to be disbanded. So that hurts our ability to get a zip code in a timely fashion, but we're still pursuing that.
I know you can't see into the future, but is there an alternative process or method that we might be able to request that zip code through if the Board of Governors is disbanded? Or do we have any insight in what that would look like?
Well, the proposal that's been floating around is that they're going to potentially try to put the USPS under Commerce. So if it gets put under Commerce, then they'll re-engage the process. But then there's a lot of folks that are saying that whether that's legal or not, that they don't know. But that's what's going on in Washington right now.
There is an alternative. It was used by Congresswoman Boebert for her district, and if you can get it through. She attached it to a bill through Congress, established a zip code for one of her areas. And that happened this last year. But that's not, from what I understand, talking to both Senator Bennett's staff as well as Congressman DeGoose's staff, That's not a usual thing that happens.
Maybe it should
And if I could I just went on the Colorado sales tax lookup database and plugged in this building, and it shows taxing jurisdictions, not Dillon, so the assumption is that at least the state's got this place on, I'm assuming they've geolocated the rest of our properties, so.
And I just went back and looked at December sales tax, and who remitted, and, the bigger e-commerces, are listed on there.
Yeah, of course, the challenge is when you drop it at the post office and
Yeah.
it's not associated at all with my house here, for example.
Exactly, so, but it's because tax is at point of delivery. So even if we had a zip code, if it's delivered to a post office, it wouldn't work, but the boxes should, because point of delivery is in Keystone, the cluster boxes should be returning sales tax to Keystone. It would help if we had our own zip code.
Yeah, I will confirm that, because that point of delivery, but if we put a zip code, but even though pick it up in Dillon, it's got the zip code for Keystone if we want. I'm not sure that we don't get.
But your delivery would be an actual physical address. It wouldn't be post office box. It would be similar to 1628.
Okay, well, I'll confirm.
Yeah. Actually, what happens if I put 1628 St. John of Dillon? Putting 1628 St. John Road Dillon still shows Keystone as the taxing entity.
Yeah, and the cool thing with the sales tax lookup too is the Department of Revenue will launch in the next few months. It'll actually include the lodging tax as well, so that should help folks in the future.
Anything else?
Nope, and then, yeah, the next graph is just the Summit County Housing Authority deposits, so you can see those. Just one little note, they emailed me the November and December figures, but when she emailed it to me, she didn't deduct the fees. So they're just a little bit less than what shows on this graph, but it'll give you an idea of what we get each month.
Are those net numbers after the fees have been paid? They take them out before they give us the net?
Right, March through October is that way, but the November and December, she just emailed me the numbers and she didn't deduct the fees. So that's what I put in, but confirming with the bank. Yeah, so just keep in mind too, like the Summit County Housing Authority, the gentleman who was in charge of this passed away right before Christmas, and so that so now that they kind of have to scramble to get us the November and December revenue numbers.
Are there any other questions for our finance director?
Looking at the revenue breakdown, wondering where construction materials are derived.
Where are they derived from?
Yeah.
So everything is basically based on the NAICS codes, and so that's the construction code of the revenues that were obviously delivered in the Keystone jurisdiction.
So you're saying any construction material that was delivered to Brightwood and Kindred are in that number?
Yes, and
Those
that,
are the two construction,
And-
major construction projects.
and maybe some other residentials if somebody was doing like some home remodeling or something, anything that was actually delivered in our jurisdiction.
Any other questions? All right. Next item was discussion of nicotine flavor ban ordinance and town manager. think you're removing that from the agenda?
Yeah, I'd like to remove that from the agenda of the town attorney, and I would like to go over that ordinance. We'll rewrite it and make it easier to understand, more compatible with what we have.
And just to make it clear, it discussed the fact that other some county communities are considering, but has anyone actually done so yet?
I think one town has passed it on the first reading. I'm not sure if Dillon has. I think Dillon passed it on the first reading at the last meeting. And we're all trying to kind of consolidate, coordinate the timing. The effective date will be January 1st, but we'd like to all get it passed in the next month or two so that all the retailers can prepare and get to. Yeah, I'm pretty sure Dillon passed it on the first reading, but I think they're the only jurisdiction so far.
In listening to the other mayors and managers, I don't think everyone feels very confident that that's going to pass. And the only discussion has been the impact on the child care and what that money is used to actually fund. They're expecting a significant decrease in revenue when the flip paper products are banned. And as a result, that money is what is used to fund things like the child care portion and other items.
And a big hunk goes towards the nicotine cessation,
Yeah.
which they're doing a really good job at putting themselves out of jobs.
All right. Councilmember Kirk.
I do have some concern about the bigger issue. I won't lose any sleep about not getting nicotine tax money. However, doesn't this all suggest that the laws to keep youth from purchasing, youth under 21, from purchasing nicotine products, is not effective if we have to do something like that? Do you have any idea what the cops are saying?
Yeah. To me, my understanding is, and from what the nicotine people have said, the laws are all working, but there's still youth nicotine use.
They're not working.
Well, speed limits generally work. Age requirements for alcohol generally work. Teenagers still, people who want to break laws still find a way. And the teen use of nicotine products has gone significantly down under the current laws and operations. This is just another step to take it to the next level, because these flavored nicotine products they're like candy, and kids will go to extraordinary ways to get this stuff. It's a multi-pronged approach. You know, the laws prohibiting and regulating the sales, and then just the marketing, the messaging, the taking away the things that appeal to kids, and that the marketing, messaging, and flavored nicotine is designed to appeal to children, not to adults.
I know this is not in your huge set of responsibilities, but if anybody you've talked to or even you've read suggests that really these sales, that there are very, what am I trying to say? That there's very little use by adults, because we're bridging adult, what's the word for it that I'm looking for?
We're taking a problem.
We're taking away their right in order to accomplish this. So do we know if there's much of a market among adults?
Can I comment on that too? Because I actually did a little bit of a survey. I did find out it is, while yes, it might go towards children, there are a lot of adults that like it and use it. And while I know it's off the agenda today, I suggest that we look at that, do a little more research before we bring it back up on council.
Yeah, I'll get all the exact numbers, and I completely understand the position. It's a fine tightrope. It's, Joe Camel, who was, going tobacco, it's, why can't they use Joe Camel? Although it did appeal to children more than adults, why was that the right thing? I'm not saying it was the right or wrong thing whatsoever, but there are all sorts of issues like this, and I guess it's how far do we want to go to try to discourage? How much do we want to abridge the rights of adults to discourage the use of children?
Well said. So let's think about it.
We're not abridging any rights at all. We're simply saying it can't be sold here.
That's all right.
That's a right of a business, not an adult. It's a very distinct difference. Any adult would be able to use that product in Keystone.
But that's a discussion we'll have when we come with the update.
And it sounds like when we have that discussion, you need to be prepared with your staff sheet that talks about exactly the issues that have been, and concerns that have been expressed so the entire council can understand the issues.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right, the next item on the agenda is discussion of Mountain Towns 2030 conference.
Okay, so this is kind of a two-part discussion here. There's a group called Mountain Towns 2030. It's businesses and resort towns and a whole lot of western towns in general. And the idea is to provide a forum it started out, the idea was to get everyone to commit to being net carbon neutral by 2030. That's where Mountain Towns 2030 came from. Park City actually started this. Quite obviously, that's not a realistic goal for anyone, anywhere. They realize that Mountain Towns now is just more a consortium of towns ranging from Missoula, Montana, Laramie, Wyoming to Summit County, Keystone Resorts, Vail Resorts. Pretty much all of the ski areas and all the ski area towns are active in this group. And the idea now is to provide communications, ideas, and open forum for communities to work on sustainability issues. Many communities have set specific sustainability goals. We in the state have a set carbon goal passed by the voters whenever it was, 10 years ago or so. So there is no commitment to us to join this group other than to be open to participate in communication.
So items 1 and 2 in the background paper are incorrect, and there's no commitment.
Yep, no commitment. It's really now just all about collaboration. They encourage towns to set goals, set commitments, but there's no sort of requirement. I think, commitment or not, there are lots of sustainability practices that make sense just economically for communities and governments and businesses. And a lot of those ideas are hashed out at the conferences and the various programs that this consortium has. Their 2025 conference is scheduled in October in Breckenridge, and it coincides with our hosting of the CAST meeting. And I need to look into this more, but Breckenridge estimates that it's going to cost them approximately $50,000 to host this meeting. And they've asked for the remaining towns and the county to co-sponsor the event with them. The other towns have all committed. Blue River at the lowest level was a $5,000 commitment to help host this meeting. It's kind of good advertising for our communities too. Just get people from to me it's always been a lost marketing idea among towns to market to other ski towns. I was in Crested Butte this weekend. People from ski towns travel to other ski towns and spend money, but they're not often marketed to by those other ski towns. This is a way for us to get our name on all those community people when they show up, but it's up to you.
Would it be safe to say that while we're looking at incurring this cost because it's in Breckenridge, that if this meeting were to happen in Park City or Jackson, Wyoming, that those communities would incur similar costs that we wouldn't necessarily be expected to fund?
Absolutely correct. This Breckenridge asked for our contribution so we could all be co-sponsors of the meeting.
And then as a follow-up, do you know what specifically the cost of running this event is, or a general idea besides running the event?
And I don't know, the director has been gone, he just got in touch with me this weekend, and I did not ask in details of the Breck town manager why it was going to cost $50,000. I should have.
Councilmember Kerr.
So when you say it is same time period as the CAS meeting here, which is our opportunity to market to other ski towns, is it the same? Is it back to back?
Back to back.
Oh, good, okay.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that the cost of membership is small, but I
There is
can't
none.
find that
There
anywhere.
is none. No.
So it's nil.
Zero.
Okay, because I can't help but think that, I mean, why would we not be in favor of collaborating toward a zero carbon future? And we actually have a community potentially strong community volunteer, I think you know what I mean, who could be our front woman for this. And maybe we look at the Breckenridge Consortium or whatever they're calling it as our exploratory opportunity to see if this is what we want to get on board.
And I agree completely. And there's no cost, however, the director said we strongly encourage people to donate money to help operations.
Okay.
And our co-sponsorship of the conference, when I said we're considering that, he said that definitely is
A big donation.
a big donation
Yeah.
and contribution to the.
So what is being offered for the various towns as co-sponsors? What kind of advertising, where are the names going to be shown?
Our names will just be on all the information sent out to all the towns about it, probably on the welcome slides, issues like that.
Valerie, Councilmember Thisted.
I am all for being climate and ecologically friendly, as long as we're not signing our name in blood that we're committed to certain policy implications for this down the road that could have unforeseen financial commitments. I would support it because it almost seems like we're dipping the toe in, but I think there are some policies from Summit County that we need to be more aware of that have led to some equity concerns and some really high costs in relation to efforts like this that we as a new town with a limited budget need to be wary of.
Agreed. Councilmember Kerr.
I think you said that very nicely. I look at the laws that were passed for carbon zero or carbon neutral for our utility companies. Well, there are a lot of second order costs that are going to come back to us in our bills. So taking, I like your thought about putting our big toe in. I also don't want to get ahead of the community's sense of goals and priorities that should be coming out of this comprehensive plan. This is an opportunity to present some of this and have them let us know whether this is our future or not. I'm confident it will be.
Yeah, and if I may say, and I agree, Councilmember Thisted, that was very well put. This organization kind of provides a forum for us to talk to all these other communities that have already implemented goals and discovered that some of their policies have ramifications that weren't expected.
Right.
And they can warn us off of making those same mistakes they've made.
Did you ever hand up, Councilmember Higginbotham?
I was just gonna say, I was initially concerned about the, bullet 1 and 2 with the commitments that it could, have for us, but now that I've heard more about it, and it seems more like a forum where we can learn from others' mistakes or successes, that I am in full support of this because of that slight adjustment.
From my standpoint, I came in here prepared to say I could not commit to a 2030, I could not support a 2030 commitment, and it was a major concern, again, because of the unexpected consequences as well. I think the town manager and working with the executive director of Mountain Towns 2030 has alleviated that, particularly by addressing the first 2 points, as Councilmember Hagan now pointed out. So I guess at this point, I'd like to just get a thumbs up or thumbs down. Does the council support becoming a member of Mountain Towns 2030 as long as there are no commitments associated? All right. The second question then is that the town manager has asked us is, are we willing to commit $5,000 to join the other towns in Summit County in assisting in defraying the cost to for Breckenridge to put on Mountain Towns 2030?
Not as excited about that. Do we have to make a decision now?
Yeah.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, because the next council
Because
meeting.
they have to get, they're putting together the
Yeah.
documentation to send out to people. And,
So does this mean in the future when we decide to sponsor a conference, we can charge all our fellow municipalities?
yeah, I've found that happens a lot in this county.
Yeah, but it would depend whether or not the conference had a conference fee and
Yeah.
was fully paying the cost of it. Yeah, Councilmember Davis.
We do have the funds available. Is somewhere in the budget.
Yes.
Okay.
So,
Where?
Board donations there, I can't remember the exact.
And if I recall, we talked about this, it's like $100,000 or something that we set aside for exactly the situation, where if we wanted to allocate funds for donations, we could.
Would we not consider this an economic development planning kind of expense?
We could.
you could, I guess
Marketing,
I'm
we
not
have that
comfortable with that
100,000 in
donation
marketing
thing, as you know.
too, yeah. I think maybe marketing is a sponsor of this, to be a sponsor of something.
I have trouble with marketing being the use for it. We have funds in other lines, I think, that are more appropriate. Memberships could be one of them.
That's better.
Yeah.
All right.
Let's do that.
So-
That's probably a good one.
So it's
Since
not
it's
a-
a donation to the organization.
So it's not a direct membership cost, but in fact, within
Yeah.
our community, it's the cost of us becoming part of this coalition, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So again, I'll ask, any other discussion on it before I ask you to raise your thumbs?
Can I, one more?
Yeah.
I just want to make sure when we are sponsors, that I want you to make it clear that you say yes, that points 1 and 2 is not us.
Yeah, no, so
They need to make it clear to them. I don't want that showing up on the sign.
it, no, it will not. It will not.
And from what I saw, another agenda item, I think you're going to have to be very careful with that, because I saw on the executive session slide, there was a statement by Breck about commitments. So we have to be very careful and make it clear that we're not committing.
Yeah, we'll discuss that in executive session.
All right. Then in that case, can I have a thumbs up or thumbs down of participating? Councilmember Thisted, did you have a thought?
No.
All right, so I saw.
Wait, I'm sorry. Yes, sorry.
Okay.
All right, so you go ahead.
Okay.
Next item on the agenda is discussion of the Brightwood project sidewalk. Mr. Town Manager.
And our town planner, Andrew Collins, will be taking this.
Thanks, John. So this item is regarding the proposed sidewalk that Lindsay and I have been working on. The town's been working on with the Brightwood development at West Keystone Road and US Highway 6. So through that process, they've developed two different options for us to consider. There's a detached sidewalk, which is off of the road edge by about 4 to 10 feet. And there's an attached option, which is a curb and gutter and a sidewalk 6 feet wide, directly adjacent to the curb and gutter of their road surface. We are pursuing a grant currently through CDOT for up to $250,000 with a 10% match. In addition, the total cost at the time of this memo was anticipated to be about $380,000 for the segment again from West Keystone Road to the Summit Stage bus stop down to the Keystone Lodge and Spa property. We got new information from the development group about the updated cost. I can share that with the group if you want to see that and have that here. Yeah.
Is it less?
No, but it's pretty close. So it would be the detached option, about $401,000 all the way to Keystone Lodge, existing sidewalk, and then the attached is about $24,000 in additional cost. Staff, talking to John and Lindsay, our recommendation was for the detached option, just for pedestrian safety, is more room between cars and travel surface and pedestrians, then pulling back at later time and putting a curb and gutter or a wider sidewalk at later time. And so really we're asking council for feedback or any preference for the detached or attached option.
And how much is the development putting into this project?
So they have told us, indicated to us per email, they'd be willing to contribute $125,000, as well as the design services so far.
Councilman Reagan.
So I'm kind of, when I was reading the two different proposals, I understand why the detached would probably be the better option. But my question and concern, right, is the gutter system that would be there. Would that help alleviate runoff, future erosion of the infrastructure? Would there, I guess what I'm trying to get at is there a benefit to having the gutter system? And is there a solution that would have the gutter system and a detached option, so we would get the benefits of a gutter system that reduces erosion and the benefits of that pedestrian safety net, if you will, almost?
Yeah, so I think the curb and gutter does deal with the drainage in a more engineered fashion. There is, on the detached option, they are grading a swale on the shoulder edge before the sidewalk, so that drainage is accounted for that design as well. You'll see that on the drawing, it's more like grading lines, those are the dark lines. So that's why it's not much of a difference in the overall cost. We did not get an option where it was both the curb and gutter and detached. Talking to the developer, they thought that would be a higher cost, and they were trying to stay within $400,000 kind of limit.
So if I may explain, there's with the detached separation, there's a much higher cost for retaining walls. We need higher retaining walls to expand the sidewalk that far over. That's why the costs are basically similar. In one, we're paying for curb and gutter, in the other, we're paying for retaining walls. Staff is, one reason and it's up to the board how we want to go, but one reason I would push detached is not only does it feel safer to me to have the separation for the pedestrians, but with detached, we can go in and do curb and gutter without having to remove the existing pathway and retaining walls. If we want to expand if we do curb and gutter now and then want to do separation in the future, we'd have to tear out the sidewalk that's put in.
Okay, kind of three real quick questions. Strategically, we're looking on the south side here. We really haven't ever talked about south side, north side for pedestrian walks. So is this now kind of committing us to the south side?
No, and if I may say why, actually, I think staff very much is leaning towards doing the north side first and foremost. The reason south side strategically here, well, there are two reasons. That stretch of right-of-way between the access road to the tennis club and Highway 6 is pretty narrow. And we don't have anyone willing to pony up $125,000 to start the project there. We feel this ties in, where it ties into the lodge, there's an underpass to the north side. So I guess my understanding was eventually the town would like pathways on both sides of Highway 6. I don't think this precludes the majority of the pathway being on the north side or entirety on the north side in the future.
Yeah, I think there's another point too, is the area where this path covers from the lodge over to the stop sign and getting people who use the path, which is heavily used by all of the Vail Resorts employees who work in Lakeside Village. In addition, if you go out there in the evenings when the shift change, you see 30, 40 employees a day walking on the shoulder of 6. In addition, there's a 7-stage bus stop there, and again, for the people in workforce housing in Wintergreen and in Sunrise, there are, if you watch again at different times of day, you see employees who've gone shopping down at City Market. They get off with their groceries. They could have stayed on the 7th stage, gone all the way down to River Run, turned around at River Run and come back and gotten off on the other side of the street, but this is faster. So they get off there, walk down to the traffic light, cross the traffic light into the area where they live. So those are the two, well, why this is a little different than any of the other areas along US 6, because it is heavily used by residents of Keystone.
One more comment. The comment I was going to make is that I guess when there's detached like that, snow removal pile up in between. If you don't have it detached, that'd be a problem. My comment, but the question I have, when I was looking at your write-up, the assumption is that we're going to get a grant of 258,000 or something. It's 200 plus. So is the question on the table today that we do it regardless, or if we get the grant, or what's the question?
I think, well, the question is, we need to start planning. Whether we get the grant or not is going to be a big deal. And I think that discussion should happen when we know whether we have the grant or not. But that being said, it's time to start thinking, let's assume the cost to the town is $280,000 to do this. Do we still want to go ahead with it? I would say, given the fact that we are collecting lodging taxes already for infrastructure, given the fact that we have 120,000 committed to this section, and we have plans being done for free for it, that this would not be an unwise way to spend $280,000 if that's what it came down to. Yeah.
Councilmember Parmet?
Three things. First, when I think of some of the most dangerous areas for people walking along the road as opposed to across the road, which is a separate issue, this is one of them. And then continue along the south side where there is whatever you call that metal railing in front of the lakeside in Decatur, and around that area. And there's really no shoulders, some of the most dangerous areas. And most of us who live here know that at night we drive in the left lane because someone's going to be walking in the right lane. So for the safety of our residents, like we do need a sidewalk there. I do want us to think about two things. One, as was pointed out, people are unwilling to ride the bus around to the safer location. And the reason of this is because of the scheduling of the bus. It's not just like, well, I don't want to wait 5 minutes. The bus sits for like 10 or 15 minutes in River Run. So like, if they want to ride to the more appropriate bus stop, they're looking at sitting on the bus for an extra 20, 30 minutes. That's why people do this. So if you want people to do the right and safest thing, make it the easiest thing for them to do. Well, we could ask for some modifications to bus schedule, that might help. Then we can also talk about providing the sidewalk. And the last thing I just want to think about is, in terms of having a separated sidewalk, that makes a lot of sense. I just want to make sure that we're also thinking that, yeah, a lot of pot debris is going to end up on there. We're going to have to do something to keep that sidewalk clear. And I just want us to think about the fact that we're not just building the sidewalk and thinking about maintaining it on weight.
Right.
We're going to have to plow that sidewalk.
Yeah, this would definitely go into the operation and maintenance part for Public Works. And we'd have to establish either contract or have the capability to clear this in snowstorms and as well. Valerie, Councilmember Thister.
So
Thister, yeah.
we're talking about funding. I guess my original impression when we started talking about this Brightwood sidewalk was that Brightwood was going to be paying for the entirety of the sidewalk. So I'm wondering when that agreement changed, and if we're talking about having to ante up, and we have clearly expressed that Vail Resorts employees are the primary beneficiaries of this, is Vail willing to ante up a portion of this worst case scenario of $280,000?
If I could add in that, I had the same exact question. And if it's not the cost of it, is there a value of it, right? Like I'm looking at this and I'm seeing traffic control supervisor as one of the biggest line items in all these proposals. Will their KES be able to provide that instead? Like, is there a service that they can provide with their massive network of operations here that would help alleviate the cost in kind, if not giving a dollar amount?
I can try and speak. I'm not sure exactly what was committed to in the past, but I know, talking to Lindsay, some of the Brightwood's commitments, they did these design and they got the cost and pricing and they realized they can't do it for what they thought they could. And so what they are saying now is, they can put in $125,000 today, that's what they're willing to do, and provide us with design services as well. But that would be what they're offering us. There's no, as far as I'm aware, no agreement, no contract with them in place to mandate this yet, but.
Councilmember Thister.
Sorry to constantly beat this drum, but I need to say something. I want to express again what he just said is there was nothing in writing. And I want to remind us that we really need to start chipping away at some of these considerations. We keep relying on this master plan that's on the horizon, but we know that we need to compel these developers to invest and have expectations when they put forth these building proposals to contribute in a very meaningful way to our pedestrian and other transportation needs in order to get these projects approved. And I'm tired of hearing that it'll happen when the master plan happens. We really did think we had an agreement with them to build this sidewalk, and they patted themselves on the back, and now they're only bringing $120,000 to the table. I really think we need to look at making some meaningful changes to our codes before we keep finding ourselves in these situations.
Yeah, I agree with you completely, Councilmember Thisted. Unfortunately, with Brightwood, this did not come through the town of Keystone. They originally had a sidewalk in the design, and the county let them take it out. So any commitment we got from them was
before the plan went to the county, it was removed by Brightwood at the request of Vail Resorts, because they didn't want to do long-term plowing of this 1,100 feet.
But the main thing is we had no say in that whatsoever.
Yeah.
And if we had been here we would not have allowed this to go forward without this incorporated into the entire plan. So when we as a town went to the Brightwood developer, we didn't have a whole lot to compel them to do this, other than their discharge problems, which they did treat to all the state standards. That's kind of why we're at the number we're at right now.
Yeah, had this been done earlier, we could have gotten incorporated in the project from the beginning. This is really being done on the largest of Brightwood doing the planning and the project. I think they initially came, I don't know what the initial plan was. This is a value engineered plan. But I don't know what the initial value was.
I think it was, the initial one was a 6-foot attached sidewalk. And then they were trying to reduce cost by doing the attached version, but then it came back to be the same cost to the retaining wall, there's other elements, so similar cost, I should say.
Yeah, I heard it was a 9-foot sidewalk and it was gonna cost between 500,000 and $1 million, so.
The sidewalk Dillon built from their intersection down to the health was $1.4 million, but that included some big drainage components.
Councilmember Davis.
They're talking about having to build retaining walls to hold up the sidewalk. Will these retaining walls not also hold up the hill and keep it from coming down into the building itself? And is it not on land that they own? And is it not something that they should have had in the plan to begin with? Or was it in the plan to begin with?
No, most of the retaining walls are down past their property, where the parcel narrows down into just right-of-ways. Up by their property, there's not a big need for retaining walls, or it didn't look that way on the plans.
And this is in the CDOT right-of-way where we're talking about
Yes.
the project being completed.
And may I follow up and piggyback on Councilmember Thisted's comments in that this is kind of the last thank you from the county, and I think it's time for us to require, I want to agree with her that it's time for us to put some requirements in, which the county has failed to do repeatedly. For example, we've got an extra 150 parking spaces there coming out of the Pines and Homestead Lodgepole. Once those buildings are filled, is going to be virtually impossible on a Saturday afternoon. And there needs to be some change in that road. For example, you've got a right-on red, which is up from US 6 onto West Keystone Road, which is blind. And that is one of the many reasons why there are so many accidents there. The fact that white on red is allowed is a problem, and there is no way to stop the traffic from and allow people to break in. So I objected to the Vale parking lot and lost that, and I understand, but we need to be considerate of the HOAs that have been here for a long time, and that needs to be in our planning process.
Councilmember Hagenhoff.
One, and I don't want to get too far off the conversation of what's the focal point here, but one thing that you said, Mr. Manager, was we wouldn't allow this to happen if this were to come to us now. Is that actually in our code that we could require?
We would have.
Sorry, what did you say, Valerie?
I agree. I'm sorry. I didn't know you could hear me. It's really painful to not be able to hear myself talk. So I apologize for interrupting.
No worries. I just I want to, and if we don't have the regulations in place to prevent this right now, if another developer were to come forward, what do we need to do to get that in place? sooner rather than later.
I will review with our community development director, our code, and make sure we have, I know there are requirements for pathways to our developments and such, but I will make sure they're not just within, the requirements shouldn't just relate to circulation within the development, and this I'm not sure whether they do or not, but should relate into how all sorts of traffic. I agree with Councilmember Fisted, with all the council members, that we have to look at how all transportation, whether it's by foot or car or bus, and how it's accommodated in new development. So we'll put that on our.
Correct me if I'm incorrect, but I believe in the development process, the back and forth with the community development department, the planner, items like this are normally handled in the negotiation process in that area for the developer to get through that process. They end up conceding items like this that are required to support the communities.
Well, as you can see from some of our developments, it doesn't always work out that way. So the best thing we could do is
put it in the code.
Put it in the code and make sure it's strong and clear.
In this case,
yeah,
it would have been accepted by the developer, even if it hadn't been initially submitted.
And I just want to go back to Councilwoman Fested's idea that originally, as I understand it, Vail Resorts kind of promoted the idea of taking this out at this point. But it is to the benefit of the employees. So while we might want to do this, this is the right thing to do, even take the big hit, I would encourage staff to go and reach out to them again. And knowing that we'll take responsibility for the maintenance, if that was a big issue, see if they'll pony up.
And I certainly will. I'll talk about our relationship in my manager's report. I think we're on a really good trajectory with Vail Resorts, and they'll be open to discussion.
Particularly in the area between the bus stop and the lodge, I suspect. There will be a lot of area there. Councilmember Hagan.
And I don't want to bite off too much here, but like in the sense of negotiating, if we cover, say, this project, will Vail commit to putting a sidewalk between the stoplight and the other Summit Stage bus stop? Or is there something else we can get of value from them that would help us swallow this big cost right now? Like if they need to budget for next year to support a project like this, will they commit in writing to a future sidewalk project if we commit to this right now?
I absolutely cannot comment one way or the other on that, although I would assume their first position would be the same as any developers. And this is, I'm speaking with no knowledge of this, but it would be, why should we take this on instead of the town, which is a 100% legitimate question.
My guess is you will not get a commitment from Vail Resorts to a future project in lieu. That if I were sitting in Vail Resorts, I probably wouldn't give that type of a commitment. But I might be willing to provide funding or some other support to this project, as we did for the Four Corners project, where we actually got a cost share with Vail Resorts. $250,000 project. The community contributed $100,000 to it. Vail contributed about $125,000 to it. It was based on a match. So I think there's latitude to work on it as we go forward. Councilmember Kerr.
4 quick questions or points. Can I assume that the money Brightwood's putting up will cover the 10% matching that we have to come up with should we get the, I mean, it's money from here as opposed to the.
As long as it's, I think it has to be town funds, whether it's how it gets circulated through, the 125 to a general fund and however it comes from.
We'd make it work.
Second?
We'd find a way to
Good.
make it.
Okay. Secondly, what is the timeline? You said you want to get started on something now before we learn whether we get
The grant?
grant? When will we know that, and what needs to be done between now and then?
So the grant application is done, it's ready to go.
Right.
They submit tomorrow, pending the option we want to go with. They'll have the awards notification third week in March. And then there's a purchase order period. Mr. Guy has to issue the purchase order to the town, which can be a month or two, they said. So that could be longer. Construction, I think, right what it said, Columbine, July, August is what they were identifying. And then about a 30-day construction period.
Okay, so nothing has to happen between now and the grant decision.
Other than the
Other than
selection of the options.
Submitting it.
The selection of the options, and we'll start, especially if I can get a general feeling of what happens with no grant money. We can start putting together the RFP so that as soon as we actually do know where the funding is going, it can be released immediately. This has to go through an RFP process. We'll make it as short and quick an RFP process as we can. We do know there are a couple contractors who would be willing to bid on this and actually help inform the numbers on this.
Councilmember Kerr.
Okay, and thank you, I appreciate that insight. Two last points. I believe there is a traffic sign for pedestrian walking there, but it is on the other side of the intersection. And no, that's another story. I have a vision, I think we all have a vision of along the north side of US 6 and long range, this will help connect rec park visitors to that other side. But we would probably end up putting in another traffic control device for pedestrians. I bring this up so that you can use this and the maintenance and operation part as a little more leverage to see if you can get a closer match out of our colleagues in Keystone Resort.
Yep,
Thank you.
and well, CDOT also, this all has to be a CDOT permitted project because it's in their right of way.
Is there, are you concerned that they will not?
No,
Okay.
no, but it's
The process.
the process, and it's quite likely when they see the terminus right here that it's quite possible CDOT might decide that that's a good corner to put a walk signal on.
Well, by their, for their, the goodness of their hearts,
Yeah,
it's
well,
grand.
They really have a mandate to protect pedestrians.
Okay.
And if this is where the sidewalk gets to, it makes sense for CDOT to have that
It does.
be where the crossing is.
Sooner or later, good.
And to them, it's some paint and 2 more lanes, so.
Thank you.
Any comments? Councilmember Hagan.
My last one is, I just would like, in our final agreement with the language, some kind of provision to protect us from overspends and cost overruns. So if we sign on to, I'm just pulling this number here, $337,000 is the total cost here, right? And then all of a sudden we dig into the ground and all of a sudden it's $500,000. I want there to be some kind of protection in there that we're not the one ponying up or expected to pony up that extra 150. But I
suspect there would have to be a discussion about that later. I could ask the attorney how those things are normally handled.
Well, I mean, as John and Andrew alluded, there was no agreement by the developer to essentially put this sidewalk in. There's no requirement. And so, to ask the developer to pay more money, that's something we could ask for if the cost increases. But again, if they're not required to put it in by this development, then they wouldn't necessarily be required to pay more money.
And we could address it with the builder we hired through the form of the contract, not to exceed.
Yeah, and that'd probably be the right way to address it. Because the agreement, the final contract would not be with Brightwood, it would be with whoever's selected contractor.
I think that's the direction it's going.
All right? And again, the purpose of this discussion today was simply detached, non-detached, what's the preference? And at this point, because we're not committing to the project yet, there's still a lot of work to be done with Vail Resorts and others. The question is, if this project were to go forward, what would you prefer, detached or non-detached? How many for ratio?
Can I ask a quick
Oh,
question?
oh, I thought you were voting.
Sorry. No.
Hand go up with 2 fingers.
I'm eager. Could you give us your sense, Andrew and John, which one is more flexible in the long run, and is there a difference in maintenance and plowing?
I mean, I think the detached is just better for now as an initial first step, as a down payment. You can then add in more sidewalk closer between the edge of the sidewalk and the shoulder, and curb and gutter later. So you're saving a little bit of money now on the front end. And then again, there's more room with detached for plowing and snow storage when the plow comes through as well, as I think you mentioned. And so, plus pedestrian safety, more separation between cars traveling, so.
Thank you.
Okay, again, let's go thumbs up for option 2,
Which is
which is detached. Thumbs up for option 1. All right, you got detached.
And if I can get a kind of non-committal feeling of the council, let's say is no money coming into this $400,000 project other than the $120,000 committed.
I'd like to address that then.
Well, my view would be, we're brought together as a town, and safety was one of the biggest issues. And so it's going to be hard pressed if there's no other options not to do something like this. That's my view.
Other thoughts?
I would say though, like, my concern is that, is this what we want to do, right? Like, we haven't done the comp plan, we haven't done the master plan. Is a 5-foot sidewalk really what the vision of the town has? Is it gonna be a 6-foot rec path? Like, so I think that if there is no other commitments and we're on the hook for all of it, we would pause it a little bit just to make sure that this is fully envisioned with what the town imagines for the future. And is it on the south side of the road? Is it on the north side of the road? But if there is somebody willing to contribute money to alleviate the cost and our cost is not the entire bill, then I'd be more willing to all gas ahead on that.
Well, when you said you assumed that Brightwood was contributing their $125,000 to it, so that was part of the assumption.
And just to kind of we actually discussed the idea of the 5-foot sidewalk as to how that ties into the rest of the rec path. This section of sidewalk is never going to tie directly into another rec path. It terminates at Lodge and Spa and at that corner. So it's kind of an isolated section of itself. So it's not a part of the sidewalk where you go from something 6 wide down to 5 and then back to 6 wide.
Councilmember Permit.
First thing, I'd like to completely agree with Councilmember Hangenhau's point about us taking an opportunity versus if the opportunity isn't what we think it is, we should actually look at what our priorities are. And while this doesn't directly connect to the rec path, it almost and essentially does. At West Keystone Road and the like, the rec path is essentially right there. I envision us being a very bike-hold community, and the stage does have bike mounts. So 5 versus 6 feet, that might be something worth looking at.
Again, I just want to, like, I don't think that that should be the reason we don't go forward with the project if we have partners in this, but it's just something to consider in the future.
or maybe we just consider that option in here, particularly if we're looking at, if I add up the numbers, that Brightwood is supposedly committing the larger size of the grant from CDOT plus the 10% that CDOT expects from the town, I think comes above the estimate, right?
No, Brightwood is contributing 120,000.
Right.
That's
Said
the max.
125, right?
I think the last email, agreement said 125, so that's good.
So,
And high end is 425, so that would be 300K from us,
Or grants.
without a grant.
yeah, worst case scenario, we don't get a grant. It's a $300,000, approximately a $300,000 commitment from us.
Best case, 50,000.
That's
Best
case,
case,
nothing.
Yeah,
best case, it could be less if we are successful in working with Vail Resorts. In this area.
and,
Councilmember Thisted.
If we got in a situation where we were in a pickle financially, is there any way we can collect the 125,000 to put in a fund that's specifically dedicated to the future project if this one were to be put on pause for a second?
I doubt Brightwood would do that. I can't speak for them, but I doubt they would. I think one reason they're willing to commit this is it also serves their property.
Okay. And then again, I'm going to say it again. I think one of the longer term lessons and things that we need to keep our eye on is making sure that our codes for future developments are ironclad in relation to holding these developers accountable. And finally, I think this is a great opportunity for Vail Resorts and Keystone to come together and display our mutual commitment to this community, given that this clearly services their employees and the improvement in our community. I was really struck at our cast meeting in Breckenridge at the established relationship between Vail Resort / Breckenridge in Breckenridge with the town of Breckenridge, and in turn, I believe it was Alterra and Winter Park. And I think we need to really cultivate that with Vail Resorts. And it would be nice if we could bring them to the table to discuss how we can actually be one community, investing in one community.
And that's precisely this discussion I think the town manager is going to talk about during the later portion of the meeting under the manager's report and the discussion we had with the Vail GM at the last meeting. All right. Do you have a sense, Mr. Town Manager? That probably isn't what you wanted, but
I don't have a sense, but we'll,
No, I think what's on the table right now is, do we want to proceed if we don't get the grant? So it's
and this is not, no, it's just how are we leaning towards that question? If we're leaning towards this is not going to happen no matter what if we don't get the grant, we're not going to start investing time preparing the RFP before the grant is finalized. If we're leaning the other way, it's worth it to invest a little staff time ahead.
I'm hesitant to publicly make a commitment at this time, particularly as discussed, particularly as we would be having discussions with Vail Resorts and others on contributing money to it. It would potentially make it more problematic from their standpoint. If we're going to go forward with it regardless, then there's not a lot of incentive for them to contribute.
Would this be an executive session opportunity to talk about this?
No, I don't believe so.
Not today. It'd have to be at another date, am I correct?
Well, I mean, it could be executive session related to instructing negotiators.
Yeah.
So you could do it that way.
Could we add it on to today's executive
can.
session?
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, we can.
Yeah.
All right.
Is that something you want to do?
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that.
Okay.
So let's not discuss it.
We don't need to
now,
discuss it.
and we'll do whatever discussion there is in executive session. item is a discussion of the general nuisance, the general nuisance ordinance provisions and Mr. Town Manager.
Yeah, and this is kind of our next step. These provisions here are pretty much taken verbatim from the Dillon Town Code. I did it that way because we have the same police department, and these will be changed and reviewed and renewed before we come back one more time to work session with a kind of finalized ordinance. I'll work with our attorney to make sure we're up to date on all our legal provisions. We're just trying to get your general feeling on these provisions. And these are the introductory provisions to the entire ordinance, along with the definition of some, what, for lack of a better term, general nuisances that aren't specifically defined as many of the other things will be in our code, like our bear-proof containers and our fireworks, or animals at large provisions. So if we just want to go through with them, and as I said, these, when I actually take your feedback, draft an ordinance, I'll work with our attorney to make sure we're using the most up-to-date and correct and easiest ways to proceed on this. These have not been reviewed by our attorney. They've been reviewed by Dillon's town attorney, but yeah.
Then what's your approach in handling the other items like of noise, fireworks, noxious fumes, animal control, camping, dangerous liquid, noxious weeds, the other stuff? What's your approach in addressing them to wrap it all into a package?
Well, we'll be bringing some of those. I think we have our schedule, which we've already fallen off, but we'll keep plowing through as closely as we can to that schedule. Some of these, as I was going over them, we can definitely combine a whole lot of different sections in one workshop as we go forward.
So that would they be separate items that would be brought forward for approval, like the bear-proof trash that would basically fall behind this general nuisance ordinance?
Exactly, yes. Council member?
Yeah, one thing, I kind of alluded to it, I forget which council meeting this was, but we really, with this, I think we need to do what's best for the town of Keystone, and I do understand that the joint police force now actually approved, and the last time I made this comment was the potential for the approval, is like, we need to do what's best for Keystone, not just what's easiest for our police department, and if that means that we have slightly different ways of operating or slightly different nuisance ordinances, that's 100% what I'm in support of. And I don't know the statistics for Dillon, but the town layout of Keystone and Dillon seems a little bit different. Dillon seems a little bit higher density, seems a little bit lower density. In Keystone, there's a little bit more rural areas, Loveland Pass Village, for example, right? Some homes in North Fork, they're a little bit more spread out, right? So just generally, as we approach these nuisances, I think that we should be keeping that in mind, that we don't copy and paste. We really look at what the town of Keystone needs and not necessarily what's the easiest for the police force because another town already approved it. And I don't want to speak for you, but I presume that's what you're going to be doing. And I do understand this is just general provisions, but I really just want to continue to hone that in and harp on that because that is something that's really important for me and I think is really important for our constituents.
And I agree entirely. That's why, well, everything we do will borrow from somewhere else to a large extent.
And then refine.
And then refine. And I think our bear-proof container ordinance is a really good example of that. That's a unique ordinance to Keystone. You won't find that anywhere else. You'll find sections of it in all sorts of different people's ordinances. But they have nothing like it in Dillon's at this point. But I think this council did a wonderful job in boiling that down. I think what we have is a very workable thing there. This one I felt could be more cut and paste because it really kind of talks about just fundamental definitions and operations and, allows us to talk about things like what should be our rights of entry, what sort of protections do we need to give our citizens from big government coming in and mowing their yards for them, things like that.
You're gonna do that? That's not.
But you won't like the bill.
Yeah. So, and as I said, this kind of section is it's gonna be changed, but I felt Dylan did do a good job, probably too thorough a job in breaking out what some of these sections are and who's accepts responsibility for nuisances, things like that. Certainly a great point to start discussion with the council on these things. So if you want, we can just start going through from the beginning. Author of nuisance. Any person who makes or causes a nuisance to exist shall be the author of the nuisance. So we are not holding a homeowner responsible for a noise violation of their renters under section 1. Do we?
Wait, sorry, can you repeat that? I think.
So let's say you're renting out your home.
Okay.
And your renters create a noise problem. First time that happens, my reading of section 1 is it's the person who caused the nuisance to exist. Now it's arguable that if you have a home that keeps having noise problems with the renters, and if the homeowner doesn't do anything, and please weigh in at any time, Jennifer, that you can hold the homeowner responsible then because they are creating a nuisance by allowing this home to continually be rented to people who cause noises.
However, that would be addressed in short-term rental ordinance because they would be subject to loss of their license if that continued. And that's covered in the STR ordinance.
Yeah, I was just giving an example.
Yeah.
They could also be in some way held responsible in this, or...
Oh, Councilmember Thistle.
But I don't think we should allow that to be exclusively covered by STR regulations. I think we need to cover Heine's and ordinances. And if, in fact, what John is saying, that if the owner fails to address a repeated issue on their property, that they then can be held accountable, then I support it. Otherwise, we need to add something more explicit.
I 100% agree with that.
I agree. All right. Councilmember Davis.
It's very hard to figure out who the renter is and was, and unless you're doing it almost immediately. I would say, from an HOA perspective, whoever you bring into your property, you're responsible for how they act. And that's something I think we need to consider. That's it, and it's a cost of doing business.
And section 2 actually kind of ties into that. That's where the author really expands any owner, agent, occupant. Basically, if you have control over physical property in some way or another, so you can go after the renter, you can go after the homeowner. It all depends on the type of nuisance being committed. Obviously, do we go after the homeowner the first time they rent to someone who has a party that gets out of control instantly? Even if the registered agent gets there and shuts it down, it still might rise to such a level where we want enforcement to some extent.
the first time it happens, it's going to be very inconvenient for everyone else. And I would keep that, I mean, a nuisance is due to the inconvenience of other people. So I feel very strongly that, I mean, I've had a party next door that went on until 2 o'clock in the morning, one time. So I think that's something to consider.
Okay, so I'm reading strong homeowner responsibility regardless.
Cost of doing business.
Yep.
STRs are a business, and it's a responsibility. We are in a resort. I do respect the fact that we have STRs, but it is a responsibility.
And it's not just a disruption to residents, it's disruption to other STR guests.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We want to create a wonderful environment for people to want to come back and visit again and again, as well as live here.
My only concern, and I am in support of it's the responsibility of the STR owner. My only concern is just this tiered approach where there's multiple instances, right? And the first one is this outcome, the second one is this outcome, the third one is this outcome. I would hate if I was an STR person that's renting, right? There's somebody who had a crazy party the first time, they got a warning. The second time it happens, there's a crazy party, they get a small fine. And then I'm the third person, right, that didn't realize 10 o'clock was the noise ordinance, and at 10:01, all of a sudden, I'm having to eat the bill for these other people that had all these parties. So I just think that there needs to be, there's a balanced approach, and I don't know what the answer is, but if the cost is being passed on from the STR owner to the occupants, we need to have some kind of way to make sure that the third person or the occupant
That's between the STR owner and their lessees. I don't see if there's any other way to handle that, like.
Councilor Davis?
And to piggyback, I absolutely agree, and I was going to make that point, but the second point is, it is the responsibility of the STR owner to inform their renters of things like quiet time. And I believe that's in our STR ordinance. So, and some do a very good job. And I spent last weekend dealing with people across the hall who had zero information. So, it's very easy for, and I have owners who have a whole notebook. These are the rules, these are what you have to do, this is where the dumpster is. It'd be nice if that was standard, but they need to let them know. And they actually need to let them know what the HOA's rules are, because in many cases, they are more strict than the town.
So is there consumer protections put in place if I'm an STR renter and I am not the person renting from the owner, and I am not told by the owner that these are the provisions of the town? Is there any consumer protections that would be in place to prevent me from being billed this astronomical fee if I do have music on at 10:01?
It's not an astronomical fee, but
I'm just saying if the owner decided to bill us.
That's between the STR owner and the guest, whatever their contract says regarding fines that are generated by their actions. And if it's generated from the law, ignorance of the law is not an excuse. If it's generated from the HOA, well, that's not the town's issue.
Absolutely, that is correct.
I guess if I might be pointed, anyone that has an STR, how does that apply? Is there any protections if you don't let anybody know about the responsibility?
you can lose your license. It's a license requirement, I believe, to have that notebook that you talked about. And if the STR owner does not have that the town finds out about it, then the enforcement action starts on the town to the STR owner.
Well, even beyond that, we've all seen people parking right in front of the sign that says, "Do not park." Just because you make something obvious to someone doesn't mean they're necessarily paying attention. And in this situation, the way I'm reading, the way you are leaning towards, so far. It's the owner of the STR is as responsible as the person who's staying in the STR and liable for a nuisance violation if that person creates a nuisance. As Councilmember Parmet said, you can contract around that. I have that in my short-term contract, that any fines associated with the renter's behavior shall be the responsibility of the renter, indemnify, hold harmless.
Let's take STRs off the table. I live on the 3rd floor, no elevator. I've had terrible problems with housekeepers coming and putting a 150-pound bag of dirty laundry at the top of a staircase. That is a safety issue. You're not dealing with a renter at that point. You're dealing with a property management company who's being careless. It's another example of why I think it's the responsibility of the owners.
And so in that case, the property management company's failure to effectively train or manage their team is why they'd be held liable.
And I fight that all. As a matter of fact, my husband came down turned a blind corner and almost fell complete. So, I mean, there are a whole lot of reasons that these things need to be in place. And it's not all renters.
I think I've gotten the answers I was asking for about those policies and processes, so thank you for explaining that.
Go ahead.
And Councilmember Davis just gave me a wonderful segue into section 3, ascertaining nuisances. I very much doubt we'll ever have putting a 150-pound laundry bag at the top of a 3-story public stairway is a nuisance. But section 3 gives me as the town manager, or my designee thereof, the right to declare that a nuisance when the pursuit of trade, business, or manufacture, or the maintenance of any substance or condition of things shall be considered dangerous to the health of the inhabitants of the town. The town manager can declare that's a nuisance that needs to be abated.
Carol?
No, Councilmember.
I think this is an important section. I agree with it, but I'd like to add to it. You say if it's dangerous to the health of any of the inhabitants, shall we add, or when it is injurious to public or private property? To that end, I can give you 2 examples. Fire may not injure or even be threatening a person, but it could ruin property. And when we get to talking about noxious weeds, if it's overrun one property, it can really cause problems in neighboring properties and a lot of costs. Is that just reasonable, right?
That sounds
Thanks.
very reasonable to me. You know, this, as I said when we first started talking about nuisances, a lot of it kind of exists in a gray area there. Because you can't really define, you can't list out everything that might be injurious to health or public health of the inhabitants or property. You have to, at this point, the enforcer has to show sense, and has to show sense in what actually would constitute an injury, and many times there will be things that it does constitute an injury, but it's borderline. Let's not prosecute. Let's talk to them first, and others. Are you ridiculous? This is a violation right here. You've left a barrel of acid on a skateboard at the top of the stairs. Okay, so the next one, and this is pretty common in almost all sorts of violations, but any offense, every time you do it, it's considered a separate offense. The way Dylan called it out here, it's because some offenses, noxious weeds, for example. They call out a 48-hour, if you don't fix it in 48 hours, it's another offense. You don't fix it in another 48 hours, it's another offense.
Councilmember, take it on.
I would love to see that say 24 hours, and I would also like a section similar to when we were talking about the wildlife proof containers, unless significant effort is shown to be made in remediating it or something like that. And then that way, somebody that has weeds on their property, right, or that there's a more complex remedy that at least if they can show significant improvement in it, isn't gonna get continually dinged, but I think 48 hours allows too much flexibility in that, in my opinion.
Councilmember Sullivan.
I was just thinking over weekends, if they need to get somebody that takes a weekend, that's 48 hours.
But that's my point, is if you can show that you've made a call, if you can show that you made inquiry into getting somebody out there, then that won't count. But if you have 2 nights of a party, the second one is really another offense, or you put 250-pound sacks of laundry there 2 days in a row, that's really 2 separate offenses.
Councilmember Parmet.
Or I think by having a separate noise ordinance, we're really gonna be able to drive that, because that's gonna be the most common, like, hey, it's a repeat thing, it should be able to be addressed immediate, versus like, there's a whole bunch of debris that's a fire hazard that maybe is not gonna be addressable in the next, hour.
Yeah. I think 48 kind of works, because the examples you gave will be covered by other specifics.
So we can create more specific timeframes
Yeah.
on certain, okay,
Yes. But I think the idea of
unless significant action.
adding in there that if you're trying, and you can show that you're taking the steps necessary. Yes, I've got your notice that my weeds need to be taken care of. I went out and bought a lawnmower and it's rained for the last 3 days.
Or in the case of noxious weeds, I contracted with X company to come in and do remediation and spray.
Yeah.
And they may not be able to get out in even 48 hours.
Okay, section 5. Should we let anyone actually file a formal complaint against their neighbor for a nuisance, or that's how I read this. A direct complaint may be filed by any person against any person. I'm not a big fan of this. I like the idea of letting your neighbor report, make a, do we go all the way to call it a complaint? Or whether it's
What's the difference between filing a complaint and filing and reporting a nuisance?
nothing, to tell the truth, that when I listened to what I just said.
So I wonder what would we lose by taking section 5 out? The point being, somebody who wants to litigate is going to do it, whether it's in here or not.
I think we need section 5 because they're the ones who, our neighbors are the ones who are most likely going to be the ones who are going to see a violation, because the town's not going to be patrolling the whole town all the time looking for noxious weeds or looking for other issues.
Okay, I interpreted this as something above and beyond filing a complaint with the town.
And that's
Is that
kind of
all it
how I
is?
did, but then when I
Yeah.
listened to myself read it and our attorney Elaine.
I would like to weigh in. I do see it as giving somebody a higher right than just reporting someone. And this section worries me in terms of, well, what do we do with the complaint what needs, what process needs to be taken. And so I think the better practice is to take it out, and people will report violations even if it's not in there.
So how does John Smith, as a citizen of the town, report in this situation?
They call me.
Okay, is that spelled out somewhere in here? I'm not trying to ask a trick question, I'm just wondering if it's spelled out somewhere else.
It's not spelled out somewhere, other than there's kind of the assumption that.
Is there any legal reason we wouldn't just here be like, to file a complaint, please contact the town staff at St. John's Road?
I've seen in other situations where people take advantage of language like this, and it becomes problematic for staff. Just because you don't have a process spelled out, we're not creating a civil neighbor-to-neighbor dispute. We're dealing with issues that are difficult for hopefully more than just one person. Because when you're dealing with just neighbor-to-neighbor disputes, it becomes problematic, and a lot of money for town staff to deal with it. Likely when these are adopted, you probably will get a web page created, and there will be reporting mechanism on the web page. There's people do call and know how to call. They don't read the ordinance to make sure they have permission.
And I think our attorney brought out a good point, and this is what kind of, the whole idea of complaint scared me is, we as a town, if we form an official avenue to give complaints, we have to treat every complaint equally and with as much investigation. And you could get a crank and we could be getting a complaint from someone against their neighbor every single day. And town staff knows exactly what's happening there, but we would have to invest the time and effort to follow the standard procedure on every complaint if we offer such a thing.
I kind of like the idea of taking it out, but wanted to question about, can it be anonymous? Can they call you and say, I'm not gonna tell you who I am, but these guys are noisy?
I mean, people can call me and tell me anything they want. I can't require them to identify
So you
themselves.
file one, it's not anonymous.
Yeah.
And so what Council Member Sullivan's getting at, or allowing me to think about, is unless we spell out specifically all these different things and over legalese this entire document, we just remove it, then it's up to people to decide how they're gonna complain on their own. And if that's coming to town hall, knocking on your door, if that's sending you an email, if that's sending one of us an email, if that's calling you, then so be it. But without spelling out a specific process, it allows us to be less invested, less held feet to the coal on cost moving forward. Is that what I'm hearing with this?
I don't think it's less invested. I think John brought up a great point in terms of that if you have this in here, then you have to deal with each of them specifically. So what if you know a complaint has no merit to it whatsoever?
And that's what I meant.
And what do you do with that? I do want to address the anonymous complaint, because that's hard when you have somebody submit an anonymous complaint and town staff is trying to deal with it. The person who is responsible for the conduct is not taking care of it, and you need to go to court, and you need proof of the conduct, and unless it's a condition that exists, say stockpiling in the backyard, you don't have to have somebody testify. But what if it's, and maybe this is covered, it'll be covered by a different ordinance, but noisy dog is a perfect example. That's a situation where you need somebody to come and testify, this is what I heard. So that's a problem with anonymous complaints.
So we can say no?
I think the town manager takes input on complaints or reporting problems from any mechanism he gets, and weighs and determines the right way to approach that issue, am I right?
Yeah, and if I get an anonymous complaint, I will push for the person to identify themselves, but there's limits on what I can do depending on the type of complaint. I don't want my neighbor to know, but he needs to take care of the weeds in his yard is something I can go right out there and see. Yeah, he needs to take care of the weeds in his yard. I don't, as we said, need someone to testify to it, but there are some things, if you want to make an anonymous complaint about your neighbor's dog barking, I'll explain, unless you're willing to come forward, there's nothing I can.
So we will allow it, but
I can't ever force someone I can't force them to say something they don't want. The way I respond to something can be different depending on how serious their complaint is. And if they're unwilling to identify themselves, certainly that takes their complaint down a whole level of how serious this really is, if I'm. So section 5 out of there. Section 8, and we'll have to make sure that this ties in with all the constitutional protections.
Section 6.
6, did I say? Okay, section 6, I'm sorry. We'll go over this, our attorney, closely to make sure we meet all constitutional protections. And to tell the truth, I think we discussed this earlier. This has with emergency abatement. Some issues need to be taken care of right now. This is, you have a bonfire in your yard that's going to cause problems if it's not put out right now, and no one's around. I've seen it before. We all know. This allows the town manager, without notice or hearing, to require a premise to be vacated. And this section 6 specifically talks of, we can vacate the premise and post premise, warning of the dangerous condition, and abate the nuisance and charge the owner right back for whatever the abatement is. We don't have to go to court to allow entry onto a premise to fix something. This is something no town manager would ever do without calling their attorney first. But this is kind of an important section, because there are going to be situations where we don't have time to give you the 48 hours to fix this, and you're nowhere around, and we can't get in touch with you, or you just absolutely refuse to do it. We can't keep going through the process and finding you until you do it. This has to be taken care of. And to tell the truth, this might be the situation with the noxious weeds where, well, no, this is actual,
This is
an immediate danger.
Yeah, it's
So,
not.
yeah. So this is emergency abatement, and it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
And next one is right of entry to when it's not necessarily an immediate, obvious danger as seen above, but when any nuisance the town manager may enter upon a lot, house, or other building or premises with proper respect of the occupant's constitutional right to examine, and this has to do with, to examine the building to determine whether a nuisance exists. And it waives liability for entering into on such a thing. This one is very legalese, and we pounded out with our attorney. But it's basically the right of entry to determine if a nuisance exists. Very seldom would this need to be used without a actual warrant or a court order allowing entry onto the property. Thoughts of this? This is where we start pushing into constitutional rights.
I guess, is this a common thing in nuisance? Because it is kind of scary.
It is. It is. It's really common. I mean, it's common to have it in. It's not really common to use it. So it's really pretty infrequent. I mean, oftentimes what happens is somebody goes out to investigate it and they ask the person who lives there, can I take a look? And the person says, yes, you can take a look. And so then they're providing consent.
That's fine.
And consent is okay under the Constitution. And then the other situations that it happens is, just as John said, you get a warrant to go take a look.
Oh, okay.
Well, okay, that wasn't clear when I looked at this, because I was
Well,
thinking.
this does not, I mean, it does have the constitutional protections. So this is another thing where before somebody in town is gonna go onto somebody's property in the backyard, there should be a phone call. What's the best way to do this? Here's the situation. How should we handle it?
We'll definitely tighten up the language a little more on that, make it more clear,
Make you more safe.
make it more safe. Yeah, and generally, no town manager wants to go on a property unannounced and say, well, I had a legal right that trumped your right to shoot me for coming on the property.
Section 7 of the nuisance ordinance.
Put that shotgun away.
Yeah. So we'll tighten that up, but it needs to be in there to an extent.
Yes.
Notice to abate nuisance. I like the idea of giving nuisance notice, but this calls out 5 days, and that's just not gonna work in many things. And some things it will work in. I think we should address this in each separate individual nuisance.
That makes more sense, because as it reads, it seems to be hypocritical.
Yeah,
That's not the right word, but it doesn't match
The part,
the part that we had earlier, like
Yeah.
every two days, we're gonna re-come at you.
yeah. I mean, there are some things you should be given. Let's work this out, and we understand it'll take time, but to tell the truth, I think we should, to the extent possible, give notice of how many days or what sort of notice has to be given
For the nuisance.
when we deal with the particular nuisance.
Yeah, so basically what would be in here would be the amount of days for the items that aren't covered as where we have specific nuisances laid out.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Unless
However,
indicated otherwise, yeah.
However, I think every nuisance, we should give people a chance to fix it. I mean, it might be you need to come fix this
This instance.
instant. I think our attorney had something. Did you want to?
No, I mean, I was gonna say that it could be reasonable. We might put in some language that's reasonable based on the conditions, reasonable notice. But certainly we are requiring somebody to appear in court, then there's a specific notice there that needs to be given.
And the next, I think we could leave in here contents of notice. If we're going to give notice in every case, which we should, what has to be in that? Abate the nuisance or request hearing in which shall be reasonable under the circumstances, pretty much what our attorney was kind of referring to. Identifying the nuisance, where and what it is and what they need to do to fix it. And saying if they don't fix it, and we'll tie up that request for a hearing because in not all cases can we wait for a hearing either. The nuisance has to be abated. But I think I'm generally okay with the language in here. I think our attorney and I need to work over that hearing language and request for hearing a little bit. And service of notice. The notice to abate a nuisance shall be served as any other legal process may be served pursuant to law. In some of our specific things we call out, and administrative notice is different than others. You can post an administrative notice on the door. A non-administrative enforcement requires service of process, or some nuisances we might call out service by mail is acceptable. I think, Jennifer, this language allows any of those options there.
Yeah, I might suggest maybe some refinement to this to be more specific, but yeah, we can work on it.
Okay, section 11 gives the town the power when they refuse to abate the nuisance to go in and mow your yard and charge you an obnoxious sum for that. And this is kind of standard in most nuisance ordinances. If you're not going to abate it, the town can abate it. This really doesn't have to do with things like noise. Town clearly can't go in and abate that, but the police can. I don't see any issues with that section personally, but if anyone. Okay, most, and we'll talk about this. Since the town manager is responsible for most of the cases, this is calling for if the town goes in and mows your yard, Public Works Director should give to the town manager a written report, clear statement of the work done by the town, the expense so incurred. I think we can just narrow that down and just make it the town manager shall prepare a written statement showing the clear costs and assessment of property. After the clear costs of abating, this allows the town to assess the whole cost for the abatement, including 5% and other incidental costs upon the lots or tracts of land from which the nuisance was abated. So this gives the town the right to lien the property if they don't pay for the abatement of a nuisance on that property. And that's a section we'll make sure is properly legally written. I give notice to myself too. And so all these sections have to do with we're charging back the homeowners for the town having to go in and do work. I think a big place you might see this is, abandoned vehicles, stuff like that. Well, not abandoned vehicles, because we wouldn't assess the property owner there, unless you were allowing no, because abandoned vehicles are only on public land. This is somewhere we're going in and fixing something at your house. You have a dangerous nuisance, whether it's dangerous to people or property, like noxious weeds, as you said. We're going to assess the property, and you're going to be responsible for the cost. And after the assessment is made, this just details how we, if we're going to go through a process to put a lien on your property, possibly, we have to make sure that the notice is properly given in such a situation. So that's what Section 14 has to do with. Section 13 is the property is responsible for the costs the town incurred plus 5%. Section 14 is how we provide notice of that assessment so you can pay it before we lien your property. Section 15 just gives the time frames on how they have to pay and explains what happens. Once again, if they don't pay, that a lien may happen. The payments have to be made to the town clerk for these situations. We could maybe change that directly to the town finance director. What do you think about that, Jennifer? Is there a reason the payment should go to the clerk since she's giving notice? Or?
No, I don't think so. It could be the finance director.
Since the next event is objection to assessment hearing, if they object to the assessment, they can give notice to the town clerk, and the town council can hear an objection from someone over whether the assessment should be upheld. I think, and we've changed a lot of things to make the town manager the hearing officer in these, but I think the town manager has such a role in developing the assessment that this should be the town council who's.
You could also do it as a separate hearing officer.
Okay.
Maybe when the judge is appointed, the contract could be that he's in the role of a judge, and he could also be a hearing officer as well.
So administrative hearing officer, yes. Section 17 just kind of continues with the proper legal steps that we have to take to make an assessment by the town a enforceable lien on a property. Section 18 is kind of standard language in all sorts of things. Just because we say these are the steps we'll take doesn't mean those are the only steps we'll take. We're allowed to take any steps legal. And cumulative. Just because you're fined doesn't mean you don't also have to abate the nuisance. Just because you're subject to a fine doesn't mean if you don't abate it, you're not also subject to the assessment for the town's abatement. Those are sections 18 and 19, basically. And section 20 just refers to the general penalty ordinance. We'll make sure the language is correct there. some of these nuisances we're calling out specific fines for. If we don't call out a specific fine, it's subject to the general penalty provision, kind of standard language. And then finally, section 21 is the real high-level definition of what a nuisance is. And I'd like your feedback on this. This requires a lot of discretion on the enforcer here.
Yes.
Some things are obvious, some things are not.
Yeah, thanks for asking for that feedback, because this is the part that made me nervous on your behalf, quite frankly. So we're taking a lot of time and effort to create policies for the known and anticipated nuisances, from fire material to dogs out of control, et cetera, et cetera. But clearly, we need some kind of category that's going to give you the opportunity to apply some subjective measures. My concern is that letter point B and point C are so subjective that you will be, it's almost like a promise of challenges and arguments and potential lawsuits. What is that graffiti on the side of my garage that I think is artistic may be offensive to someone else. It could be that bright night lights are technically correct, and yet the net effect is very bright. There is so much subjectivity. I feel like you don't want to spend, or you can't afford to spend your whole time adjudicating these subjective things. So I'm concerned about B and C. Maybe even C could be more clear. I don't know if you're talking about just smell. But it just seems like a ticket to problems.
And as I said, I pulled this
Yeah, I know.
directly from Dylan, and
That's why I
B
thought
and
this is
C
worth
worry the heck
discussing.
out of me
Yeah,
too. I think A is pretty obvious and safe to allow the discretion. D specifically refers to unlawfully interferes, so that's clearly defined. Obstructs are, yeah, you can't block a road with a car, that's against the law under the traffic code. E is another interesting one.
I wouldn't even know how to apply that. I mean, what would be an example?
Is your dog barking at you, making you feel unsecure in your property?
It's your dog?
Or is your dog that runs at you and jumps on you?
See, I don't have an issue with that one.
I relate to this one especially, and I'm going to share a quick story. When I lived in employee housing, I had somebody go to move into employee housing, and my dog was in there. And if you've ever met my dog, she's a white shepherd husky. And the person who went to move in shrieked, slammed the door, and I got a call from employee housing saying I had a wolf living in my apartment that made them fearful for their lives. And so, like, that is a very and she's the sweetest thing ever, she'll come and lick you, right? So she wasn't being aggressive, but that is one example I personally relate to in the sense of reasonable and prudent person might not think that that is a fear for their life, but some people do.
Yeah. Again, that one didn't concern me, but I have to admit, you go on to F, interfere with my uncomfortable enjoyment of life.
How the heck are you going to draw a line there?
Isn't the intent of these to rely again on town manager or the enforcement's discretion and to try to cover those items because we can't address everything that can come up in an ordinance?
But let me give you an example of where F can be a problem. In my condo complex, there's a homeowner who owned a home in Florida, and they painted their house Starry Night.
Okay.
Windows Starry Night, the entire house.
Good example.
They were, their HOA went after them, and said this is depreciating the property value of others, it's interfering with our comfortable enjoyment of life and property. The homeowner who did that actually ended up winning a lawsuit, and we're allowed to do that because there were specific design standards, and the HOA and the town tried to use the vague general terms here. The judge found that the specific design standards should be relied upon in this situation more than language like this.
I mean, you got code and HOA covenants to cover this. But go ahead.
And actually, the depreciating the value of the property of others is less subjective.
Yeah.
I wonder, I know you said the Dillon attorney looked at this. I wonder if you could have a conversation with the Dillon police, who would actually end up enforcing this, to talk about before it comes to you, to see if offends to decency or interferes with enjoyment of life are problematic phrases, because they seem to be that to me.
They're pretty standard phrases, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is intent to give, if something happens, to cover those items that you don't have individual stuff.
Councilmember Kerr, I think I understand your worry is that this could be abused egregiously to do whatever for whoever. One, I think the purpose here is to try to get a catch-all for a reasonable interpretation. And if it were to be abused, that would come back on the town, because then they could sue. So,
If it is being abused, then the council's latitude in that is to go right after the town manager and fire him. We are the ultimate, absolutely, we are the ultimate adjudicator of whether the abuse occurs. And if the abuse in the enforcement occurs, we have the oversight and responsibility to address that with the town manager.
Let me be more specific.
Am I right, John?
No, you're absolutely, I'm just.
I understand that, so you're giving me the right to go to the town and say, you have to do something because if this offends to decency or interferes with the enjoyment of my life, and should you say that's not reasonable, then I think we're probably setting this up for a lawsuit, but
Jennifer?
you tell me.
No, there's no, I mean, anybody can file a lawsuit for any reason.
And they do.
But there's no claim for failing to follow your laws. The town has absolute discretion
Okay.
to choose what to enforce and what not to enforce. Obviously, consistency is better, but there is a wide latitude of discretion, and there's no legal right to say you have to enforce this.
Okay, my singular concern is for the time, energy, and mental state of our town manager. But if you think this gives him enough leeway without boxing him in, I back up. Thanks.
So what I'd like to recommend at this point is town attorney and town manager have heard the comments. I'd like to ask them to get together and actually give us a draft that they both believe, based on our comments, applies to Keystone. It's very difficult for us when we have something from another town and then the staff has not yet come to a consensus that this is what we want, what we recommend for the town. We're in a very awkward position now of trying to give guidance that we really don't know the ramifications of this point. And so I'd like to see something come back to us that actually has legal consensus, town staff consensus, is something that you would be happy if we approved. Although we have the latitude to make any recommended changes in there, but I think that's what we really need to make a decision. Is that okay with the rest of the council?
I will say, I think that this was very beneficial to go through and understand it, provide comments, and I think that like most anything here, we're not gonna agree 100% on everything, but it was good to at least get that feedback. So thank you.
But if we had something that was closer to what the staff and the attorney agreed to, it would have focused our comments as well. I find it difficult when the presenter gives us information, it says, but I don't agree with what's here. I think this ought to be changed. I think it ought to be a consensus from the staff that comes into us, and then we can question that and then make a decision whether that's what we want or we want something else.
Well, to be dead honest, there are things that I might not agree with that council would like to see, and I need to make sure you're aware that those options are out there and they're your choice to make. I shouldn't make the choice for you by withholding.
But you can discuss that when you go through the line by line. But we bounce all over the place in our comments. And it's very difficult. It's very difficult. I think it's very difficult for this body to come to a consensus of what's needed for the town. Councilmember Carmet?
I appreciate very much this nuisance ordinance as presented. I found nothing in here controversial. I think we had a lot of discussion, I thought, understanding,
Yes.
Yeah.
but not a whole lot of changes that needed to be made, so good work.
Yeah, I thought I'm just concerned that we don't spend a lot of time and energy looking at something that staff and the attorney doesn't necessarily needs to be in here. It's fair to mention that as you go through it, but I'd like to see something cleaner, I guess, as a first cut. And we take steps to clean this. Are there anything else on the ordinance for today?
Nope, that's it for today.
We have the next item is discussion of manager council issues. I hope to be able to bring that item forward from the primary. We also have this agenda on the, we also have this on the council meeting agenda coming up. I was hoping to be able to bring that up. But given the hour, and it's 6:25, we have food out here. I recommend that we defer discussion of those manager council issues until the regular meeting. And is there any objection to that?
Yeah, we just added something to our executive session and we're going to go really late. Can we eat and talk?
I'm happy to do that. Again, we have 35 minutes to the council meeting.
Although I think and I'm happy doing whatever you want, it should be a relatively quick meeting until executive session.
Yeah. Historically, we take about 30 minutes regardless. You can't get this group back together. You say 20, you can't get us back together in then less than 30.
I'll talk with my mouth full.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, all right, the meeting is adjourned, and we'll come back to 7 o'clock.